I spent years believing it was a strength. I was the one who showed up, the one who gave without keeping score, the one who absorbed what other men would have walked away from. And I told myself that made me better than them, more mature, more evolved. I was wrong. What I called character, the room called permission. What I called patience, they called weakness. What I called being a good man, Machiavelli would have called a target. The world does not reward goodness. It rewards leverage. And the man who cannot be moved, cannot be used, cannot be made to feel guilty for holding his ground. That is the man the room respects. Not the one who keeps showing up to prove he is one of the good ones. These are the 7 reasons being good made you easy to destroy. Rule 1. He understands that goodness without boundaries is just availability. There is nothing wrong with being a man of character. The problem is, what happens when that character has no walls around it? He gives his time because he was taught that is what good men do. He absorbs conflict because he was taught that is what strong men do. He stays when he should leave because he was taught that loyalty means endurance. And slowly, without a single moment he can point to, he becomes the most useful man in every room and the least respected. Machiavelli was precise about this. Availability without cost is not generosity. It is a standing invitation. Rule 2. He stops mistaking tolerance for virtue. Most men who have been taken advantage of were not weak. They were patient. They told themselves they were choosing not to react, that they were above the pettiness of keeping score. Epictetus wrote that it is not what happens to you, but how you respond that determines your character. But there is a version of this men get backwards. Non-reaction is not always discipline. Sometimes it is fear dressed up as philosophy. The man who tolerates everything has simply never decided what he will not accept, and the people around him made that decision for him a long time ago. Rule 3. He stops performing goodness for an audience that is not watching. He has been good in the hope that eventually someone will notice, that the effort will be seen, that the sacrifice will be acknowledged, that one day the room will turn and say, "We know what you gave." It never comes. Not because the room is blind, because performance is not the same as presence. The man who is good because he needs to be seen as good has handed his self-worth to whoever is watching. Machiavelli understood this with cold clarity. A prince who requires the approval of his court to feel secure has already lost his court. Real character does not perform. It simply holds. The man who is the same whether anyone is watching or not cannot be manipulated through recognition because he stopped needing it. Rule 4. He recognizes that guilt is a weapon and stops letting it land. Someone needs something he should not have to give. He hesitates, and then comes the look, the silence. The implication that a good man would not hesitate, that only a selfish man would say no here. And he folds. Not because he wanted to, because the accusation of being less than good is the one threat he has never learned to absorb without flinching. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. The composed man does not fold under guilt. He does not explain himself. He simply does not move. Rule 5. He stops apologizing for having standards. The man who has been trained to be good has also been trained to soften every boundary with an apology. He says no, and then immediately explains why. He holds a line, and then qualifies it so the other person does not feel bad. Machiavelli understood that power explained is power reduced. Every time a man justifies his standard to the person trying to cross it, he has communicated that the standard is negotiable. It is not a rule. It is an opening position. He does not apologize. He does not explain. The standard exists. That is enough. He holds it and moves on without looking back for approval. Rule 6. He audits who taught him to be this way and why. This is not about blame, it is about clarity. Someone handed him these values. Be humble, be accommodating, do not cause conflict, be the bigger man, put others first. And those values did not arrive neutral. They arrived with a purpose. A compliant man is easier to manage. An agreeable man is easier to use. A man who has been taught that his worth lives in how much he gives is a man who will give until there is nothing left, and then blame himself for running dry. Machiavelli wrote that men are shaped by the laws they are raised under, and that the first act of a free man is to examine those laws and decide which ones deserve his allegiance. The man who never examines where his values came from is still living under someone else's rules. The audit is not cynicism. It is the beginning of self-ownership. If this one hit close to home, subscribe. Every episode goes one level deeper. You need to be here for what comes next. Rule 7. He rebuilds his identity around what he will not accept, not what he will endure. The man he has been is defined by his capacity to absorb, how much he can take, how long he can wait, how much he can give before he breaks. That is not an identity. That is a damage report. The man he becomes is defined by his lines, by the things he has decided, quietly, privately, without announcement, that he will not accept from anyone. Not a boss, not a partner, not a friend, not a room. Seneca wrote that a man who does not know what harbor he is making for, no wind is the right wind. Without a standard, every compromise feels reasonable. Every violation feels survivable. Every line feels movable. The man who has decided his lines in advance does not negotiate them in real time. They were already decided. He is simply enforcing a choice that existed before the room ever tested it. Most men who read this will resist it, because the alternative, becoming harder, colder, more difficult, sounds like a betrayal of who they have been. It is not. The man who stops being endlessly available is not less generous. He is more deliberate. The man who stops performing goodness for approval is not less moral. He is more honest. The man who stops absorbing what he should be refusing is not less strong. He is finally using his strength correctly. Machiavelli observed that the men who commanded the deepest respect were never the ones who gave the most freely. They were the ones who made it clear, through consistency, through stillness, through the absolute refusal to be moved by pressure or guilt, that their character belonged to them, not to the room, not to whoever needed something from them today. That is not coldness. That is ownership. You were handed a set of values before you were old enough to examine them, and you carried them faithfully for decades because you believed that was what a good man did, that if you gave enough and absorbed enough and stayed long enough, the room would eventually recognize what it had in you, and the room never did. Not because you were wrong about your own worth, but because the room was never reading your sacrifice as strength. It was reading it as availability, as a signal that you could be given less and expected to ask for nothing, that your yes was automatic and your no was negotiable and your standard was whatever the situation demanded of you. And somewhere in the years of proving yourself to people who never asked for proof, you lost the thread back to the man who decided things for himself, the man who held his ground not because he was angry, but because he had already decided what he was and what he was not. And that man is not gone. He was simply waiting for you to stop being so good to those who never deserved it. You already know what you are, finally ruthless.